So welcome back to week 2, everybody. Thank you for joining us again. We're super excited to be here. This week, we've got a few new college members that are joining us. A couple of the ladies that joined us last week couldn't make it tonight, so we've got some guys from our judging team that are filling in for them and helping out. So with that, we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves again. My name is Sarah McDonald. I'm a third-year student here at Lakeland College. I'm currently studying agribusiness. I have a background in 4-H judging and Canadian Junior Angus, and I grew up on a commercial Angus cow-calf operation in southern BC.
I'm Kaylee Wersta. I'm from Elk Point, Alberta, where my family and I own and operate K-Cow Ranch. 250 head of purebred Hereford, Charolais, and Black Angus. I was in 4-H for 9 years, and I show cattle extensively.
Hi, I'm Cody Carson. I'm from Rossburn, Manitoba. My family and myself operate a purebred Simmental herd as well as some Black Angus cattle. I was in 4-H for 8 years. I judged there. I've judged with the Manitoba Simmental Association, and I've judged a few 4-H shows myself.
My name's Tyson Black. I'm from Ontario. I come from a purebred Charolais operation. I've been in 4-H ever since I've been able to, and I've also been in the junior Charolais program since I've been able to as well. And I've judged through 4-H and through the Junior Charolais Association.
So tonight we're going to be talking mostly about terminology. We're going to be talking about equine, beef, dairy, and sheep. And with this terminology tonight, we kind of have assumed that you guys know how to judge since you're in the advanced group. So our goal is to just give you some more reasons and some different terms that you can maybe add to your judging toolbox. We're also going to be working on transition words. So how to go from talking about 1/2 to 2/3 without sounding like you just stopped and started, so that you have a smooth transition within your reasons. And then at the end of tonight, we're going to take what we've learned last week and then tonight and actually get to put it into practice. And you guys will get to do some analyzing some different species and deciding which one has better characteristics. So we're going to start off tonight with equine. When you're judging horses, there's basically 4 things you want to look for: balance, quality, muscling, and structure. So in terms of balance, that means how well does that horse blend? Are they smooth from the tip of their nose to their tail head, or does the horse kind of have a short neck and a long back and doesn't look smooth throughout? In terms of quality, we want to look at their head, neck, and hair coat. That's not a crucial part, but it certainly contributes to a horse. When you see a horse that has maybe short neck or a scruffy hair coat, you can kind of pick up on other things that maybe are poor in their quality as well. With muscling, we're looking at forearm, shoulder, stifle, and their gaskin. So you want a horse that's well muscled, and that totally depends on what that horse's discipline is going to be as well. So if you're looking for a ranch horse, you might want a horse that's got more muscling than something that's strictly arena. It also is going to depend on if you're doing, say, barrels versus roping. If you have a rope horse, you're going to want something that's a little more muscled in their hind end so that they really have strong stopping capabilities. Whereas a horse that's meant for barrel racing doesn't need to stop quite the same, but they do need to be able to dig deep and turn on the backside of those barrels. And finally, we're talking about structure. So does that horse have a correct set of feet and legs? Are the angles correct on those legs, or do you have a horse that's really bow-legged or sits too far back on their pasterns?
These are really just some equine phrases that you can use. You don't have to, like, I know it's a lot of words on the page, but if you want to take a picture of it and write it down later, that is perfectly okay. I know I have a list of, like, it's a full list, and every time before I judge, I look at the list just so that I can refresh my memory on, like, on these phrases and how I can move from saying and talking about one thing to talking about the next thing, or how to describe what I'm talking about. So these are just some phrases that are really good for when you're in your oral reasons to kind of step up your game in that sense.
Like Kaylee said, we know we've put a lot of words on here, but feel free to take a picture. We'll linger on the slides a little bit longer if you need a second.
Okay, so now we're moving into beef heifers. We've kind of got 4 main points for you guys on these heifers, and number 1 is structure, and structure is right up at the top because in a breeding female, this is one of the most important, one of the key aspects that you need to be looking at. So breeding females, excuse me, must be sound, and they must track well. So the reason we say this is because their structure is directly tied to longevity. You want a beef heifer that can give you multiple calves in the future rather than just one, and then, you know, she gets crippled or stifled or something like that. So you want to see a good set to the pastern, a nice flex in the hocks. You don't want her to be too straight-legged or anything like that. And that's basically your structure. So moving into our next point here, volume. So that's basically, you know, her depth of body, her spring of rib. Capacity is a really good term to use when you're judging a beef heifer. And it's basically just how much of the animal is there. What does she have to her? And now our next point, femininity, comes in, and it kind of crosses over with volume a little bit. So when you say you want lots of volume, you do, but in that front 1/3 of the heifer, you really want her to look tidy and attractive. Anything that's hanging, you know, if she has an extremely big dewlap or brisket, anything like that, that's all waste. You know, our end product for these animals eventually, or their offspring, is to produce quality meat for the meat market. And all that stuff through that front 1/3 is practically wasted meat. We don't use a whole lot of it. Finally, coming into muscling, does she have enough? This is kind of, I don't know if I want to say a fine line, but there's definitely a line there. You want a heifer to still be very muscular, but in a sense, you also want her to be not too muscular. You don't want a big crest on the top of her neck where she looks like a bull, but you do want to see her have a nice rump, you know, some muscling to her, so that in her offspring, she can pass down those traits.
Moving into steers, muscling is definitely the biggest thing you're looking for whenever you're judging a steer. You'll look through the rear end and through the hind quarter. That's where you'll find the most muscling. And then across the top, you'll want to check him out, make sure he's actually finished off, that he's not just all hair and nothing under there. And I guess that goes into the correctness of condition. You'll look at the brisket. You'll want the brisket to be filled out enough that there's actually some meat in there, not just a thin old steer that doesn't have as much quality to him with his meat. And again, with the balance, you'll want him to look good from front to back, the eye appeal. Structural correctness, you'll want him to be able to get out and move and show himself off enough, but it's not quite as big of a deal as it is with a breeding animal, as he's going to be slaughtered in the end. When you're looking at growth, you want him to be well proportioned. You don't want him to be a short, fat steer. It doesn't look as good as one that's proportioned well together. And then the volume and capacity. you'll want them to have some depth of rib, but then in the end, the depth of rib too much, that's all waste. All the guts is just waste. So too much belly is not really ideal for a steer in the end, as it just gets taken out to the dump and doesn't add anything to your end goal of the meat.
So as the guys had mentioned, feet and leg structure is really important in beef animals, whether that's breeding animals or market. Your front legs are really important on breeding females, especially. You want to make sure that they're not bow-legged or knock-kneed or anything like that. And if a breeding animal with poor leg structure, like Cody mentioned, isn't going to have the longevity.
This is a fairly similar thing too, just looking at hind legs. And I mean, it really determines how long a breeding female is going to last. So really looking at the picture, the middle image, the middle silhouette is the correct one. You don't want them to be toeing out or toeing in. You don't want them bow-legged. And when you look at them from the side, you don't want their hind legs to be too far underneath them where they're too sickle-hocked, or too posty, or straight-legged as in the picture on the left on the top.
So here again is just some phrases that you could use when you are out evaluating beef cattle. Again, a lot of words, we're not going to go through them all. A couple good ones to note are deeper in the heart girth. That's something you'll hear a lot. A lot of really professional judges like to use those terms: deeper flanked, cleaner, stronger, longer, all those type of things.
And you notice too, with all these phrases, they have a lot of ER words in them. And so when you're trying to compare, say you have 1 and 2, I place 1 over 2. Why? So when you're trying to explain why, you use ER words so that you are comparing them all the time. So 1 is smoother, cleaner fronted, wider, deeper chested, deeper heart girth. It's a really easy way to make sure that you are comparing the animals instead of just describing them.
Yes, and whatever you do, don't find yourself caught. And especially if you're giving oral reasons or something like that, always think back to those ER words that you have in your back pocket. Don't ever say good or better or something like that. You know, always reflect back to these ER words or these phrases.
So moving into the dairy cow now. So the biggest thing when you're looking at a dairy cow, you want to look at her udder. The udder is what makes the money on a dairy animal. You want to make sure that it's a nice even udder that is well balanced. All 4 quarters look the same, have the same levelness to them and the teats with them. So then dairy strength is just the overall looking through their milk lines, as you see on their belly, the milk lines running to the udder. The feet and legs, look at those, as the cows still need to be able to get up and down when they're in the barn, be able to walk to get their feed, get their water, to get milked, all that. And then looking at the frame size, with dairy cows, you want a really deep female, one that can pack a lot of feed into her. And so you look at through the ribs and guts, you want her to be a deep female to be able to pack on the goods to produce the milk that she's going to do.
Again, we have here some more dairy phrases. So like Tyson said, the udder and the mammary system are really important in dairy. So talking about foreudder attachment and the smoothness of that foreudder attachment is a strong phrase for dairy judging, as well as the height of the rear udder attachment. You can use terms like more desirable or more capacious. Growthier is definitely a term you want to use in dairy animals. And then especially with dairy, if it's not a class that you're maybe as strong in, but you end up judging it, try and use terms that are correct. So use things like their mammary system or their fore rear udder attachment. And make sure that you're also saying like teat placement as opposed to a more jargon version of that. I've heard people say, tit placement or the bag on that cow, which is definitely correct, but it's definitely more of a rancher farmer version. And it's maybe not something we want to take into a judging class. So make sure that you know some proper terms to replace those jargon slang words we have.
When we get into breeding sheep or ewes, in reality, sheep are very similar to judging beef. They're really the only difference is your terminology and like the words you use to describe them. So you wouldn't say a yearling heifer or a breeding bull. Like your terms for sheep and beef are different. So for a sheep breeding ewe class, you talk about structure, you talk about the balance, muscling, and performance, very similar to beef. So like a heifer and a ewe are very similar. You want correct structure. So they stand well on our forelegs. They're very balanced. They have enough muscling to carry that trait onto their offspring. And then enough performance that they're not, I guess, in beef terms, they're not just raising, like purebreds aren't raising a bunch of steers. You want them to have some growth to them and be able to continue and, I guess, breed back regularly every year, not come up open, and all that kind of stuff.
Moving on to the market lamb, just like Kaylee said, sheep and beef are very similar. So when you're moving into judging these market lambs, if you're familiar with steers, with just a bit of practice, you can get it down fairly easily. We start off again, our most important point, and this is practically on any market animal, lamb, steer, anything like that. You want to see lots of muscling. So you want to see a good rump on these lambs. You want to see them carry that forward into their loins and down into their rack. You want to have a very massive rack. That's something that a lot of judges will say when they're talking about market lambs. Moving to performance, this is just thickness throughout. We want them to be good, finished. And when you are judging these in person, it's very important with a sheep to know what you have in front of you. You really have to get your hands on them. You have to be able to feel them because that wool covers up almost everything. And on the surface, they all look just about the same. So you really do have to get your hands on them and feel around for that muscling and that performance. Moving to structure. Structure is a very, very important part, but in a market lamb, it's maybe a little bit less important. That's why we have muscle and performance up at the top. As long as this guy can get to his feet in water, that's all he really needs structure-wise. But when you are judging market lambs, if something is not moving well at all or is just really struggling to get around the ring, don't be afraid to comment on structure. Just don't push too heavily on it. And then balance, that's another thing that they'll talk about in market lambs. We do want to see a great big, massive rump on him, but we want him to push that forward into his loins and into his rack. If he's got a massive rump, but then no potential in the middle section of his body, I mean, that's good. It has a purpose, but your most expensive cuts of meat will be smaller than that rump, right? So you want them to be very balanced, very even throughout, and just really evenly finished.
And like Cody had said about having a judging competition where you have to get your hands on them, some competitions won't let you touch them. And I know that can be really difficult. So at that point, do the best you can with what the rules are laid out. If you can touch them, definitely do that and feel them. and feel how much cover they have if they're a market lamb. If you can't touch them, I guess, judge them from a distance, and maybe when you're judging them at a distance, maybe comment a little bit more on that balance or that structure, because that's what you can see. And in your oral reasons, you can say, well, I wish we could have put our hands on these lambs today, but from what I can see, and then go into your reasons. And that just shows that, it shows the judge that you wish you would have been able to put your hands on them, but based on the guidelines for the judging competition, this is how you judge them because of those rules.
Yeah. And try not to throw everything away about your muscle and performance. It's still very important, but it's going to be very difficult. Do your best to get a look at, their top line, stand behind them, get over top of them. On a market lamb, you want to see a really wide and really flat loin. So, you can kind of eyeball that a little bit without touching them, but yeah, definitely do your best. And it is definitely difficult to evaluate the animals without being able to feel them, but you have to do your best.
And if I could add to what Cody and Kaylee have both said, with whether it's sheep or steers or swine, when you can't touch that animal and really feel the muscling, also think about length of loin, because you have to remember that's where your lamb chops or your pork chops or your steaks come from. So an animal with a short loin is going to have less of that cut of meat in there. So that's another reason you could use when you can't physically feel for muscle, but you can tell if an animal is shorter through the loin, then they're not going to have as many cuts there.
And once again, with the phrases, you're looking at comparing them. So you talk about the widest of them, the longest loins, all that. So if you guys just want to take a quick note or picture of these, and we'll move on.
What part of the lamb is the rack? I couldn't find it in the picture.
You guys want to answer that, or you want me to?
So the rack is looking at like the rib structure of them. So it's kind of the same as the ribs of an animal is the rack on a sheep.
Yeah, it's often in sheep, and a common dish for sheep, or like a good cut for sheep, is the rack of lamb. So in a lot of other species, we don't really look at that as much, but that's something that's very popular to people who like to consume lamb. So we do try to focus on the rack when we're judging these market lambs.
So when you're doing that, you'll want to make sure you get your hands, make sure there's actually coverage over the bones and there's actual meat on the bones of this lamb.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. So that kind of wraps up looking at the animals. Now we're going to move into transition words. So like we had said earlier, these are words that you might use to move from one reason to another, or one set of placings. So 1/2 to 2/3. So what transition words can you guys think of? Maybe it's a word you use or a phrase. This is where we want to see what you guys know. Feel free to either shout it out or put your hand up in the chat, whatever you guys want.
When I'm transitioning between some of my pairings, I like to say moving along to my next pair, or in my next pair, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great transition phrase. Can you guys think of any others? Nothing else? So the rest of you just stand up there and go 1/2, longer loin. You guys aren't very chatty tonight. You were much chattier last week. All right, we'll help you out.
these are some transition words that you can use. So like furthermore, additionally, as well as I tend to stay away from I grant. I mean, I know our coach, if you say I grant too many times in your set of moral reasons, he will call you Grant for the rest of the session. So I tend to stay away from that as much as I can to try not to get into the habit of saying it. So instead, I'll say I recognize, or I admit, or I realize, that kind of thing, instead of I grant all the time. But it's definitely something you can use, just not extensively.
Here are a few more transition words. We've kind of put them into short little phrases. So if you were talking, this is how you'd actually use them. We have one is overwhelmingly, runs 3 to the top of this class. You would give your reasoning, the overall capacity throughout runs 3 to the top of this class. 2 wins the class quite handily. Or you could also say 2 comes to the top of the class quite easily for me today, and then explain your reasonings on why. Leading off this class, that's a really good way to start. Yeah, and then you can go into things like 4 is undoubtedly, the thickest or the strongest footed or something like that throughout the class. So these are just really good words to make your speaking sound fluent instead of having pauses and it sounds choppy and stuff like that. And also, when you're giving oral reasons to someone and you start using phrases like this, it makes you seem really confident in your answers. And then even if you didn't place them the same way that judge may have, you may be able to convince him exactly of why with your level of confidence.
So I guess now we'll start comparing some animals. So we'll look at these horses, and who do you guys think is the most heavily muscled in this group?
The Palomino.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think you're absolutely right there.
Then who has the shortest top line?
Would that also be the Palomino?
I think in this class, it's a pretty close match between the Palomino and that gray dapple. I would say the sorrel on the left is probably the longest spined horse, but I mean, like any judging class, it's one person's opinion on the given day. So if you think that the Palomino has the shortest stop line today, then absolutely that would be the reason or the placing that you would defend.
And another thing to consider would be that muscling does have an effect on your eye. So if that Palomino is the heaviest muscled in the class, it may almost make it seem like the top line is shorter when it may not be.
The other thing you can look at too on determining how short or long their top line is look at their underline. You want a really short top line and then a really long underline. And it kind of, you don't want them really rectangular like beef. You want them, I guess you want them sort of cut up in the flank a little bit, I guess, in beef terms. And so that's another thing to look at. If they got a really short underline, you kind of want them at a parallel where the top line is short and then that long underline. And I guess it gives them more running and more stopping power.
And also, which horse do we think is the most balanced in this group?
if the sorrel is most balanced.
Yeah, I'd probably say that too with that one.
We weren't very nice with these pictures for sure. I don't think there's a horse here that you could really say is unbalanced. So we might have had a bit of a trick question there.
Yeah. And so when you're going to, I guess, create your placing for this class, so out of the 3 questions, the Palomino kind of rose to the top in 2 of the 3 questions. So when you're looking at who is your top place and how to place your class, look at and try to compare them to your ideal animal. Have a picture in your mind of what your ideal animal looks like, and it doesn't have to be one in the class. And try to pick out like what each, it's hard to explain. So the Palomino is like, you go kind of a checklist, I guess. The heaviest muscle, then the shortest top line. He covers 2 of the 3 things I'm looking for. He has the most pros, and he is most closely related to my ideal animal. So that's what brings him to the top, because he has, I guess, the least flaws or the least cons about him. Where the gray might fall into the middle, depending, or the sorrel might, just depending on, and I mean, I guess these pictures are hard to determine some of the qualities by, but your animal that has your least amount of pros and I guess the most cons when comparing them to your ideal animal, that's the one that falls to the bottom of the class. And I mean, that's an easy way, I guess, that I use, so that it's easier for me to determine my placing. So if 2 of them are really close, so say the Palomino and the gray are really close. Well, as of right now, the Palomino has more qualities that I'm looking for. He already has more pros. So that's where he would come to the top, or he would rise above the gray.
Yeah.
If you have questions about that, like, let me know, because I don't know if I explained that extremely well.
And then at that point, it moves into, you know, who your top horse is. He's got more pros. The other ones have some cons. And then basically you take that and you just form it into your reasons. So you know you like the Palomino, but why do you like him? And really think, because there is something, like you'll know why you like him, right? You've chosen those pros and those cons and why he's the strongest. And then you just use those to the best of your ability to make your reasons and give them confidently.
The other nice thing, if this was a class, is that there are 3 different colors. So we had talked last week about how to use characteristics when you're giving your oral reasons. So in saying your oral reasons, you would say the Palomino stallion rises to the top of this class very handily for me because this, this, and this. Or the gray stallion falls into second because whatever. And when you're using characteristics or like the colors or markings, it's easier for a judge to follow. And it not necessarily creates a story, but it's easier to follow rather than saying 1/2, 2/3. I know, because then the judge has to mentally think about, okay, who was my number 1, rather than just like the Palomino. Okay, yeah, I know who the Palomino is right off the bat, and it's easier for the judge. So that can kind of give you an advantage when you're doing oral reasons as well.
Next, we're going to be comparing these beef animals here. So which one would you guys say has the most bone? Anybody have a guess?
Third one.
Yeah.
It's sometimes hard to tell in these pictures, but I guess for me, 2 and 3 are very close in terms of the amount of bone they have. An easier question would be, who has the least amount of bone? I see in the chat 1. I would agree with that. She's a little bit finer boned, a little bit frailer.
Okay. What about the most muscle? Which one do you guys think has more muscle?
I'm seeing 3 in the chat, which I would agree with 3. 2 also has quite a bit of muscle. But again, it's really hard to tell just by pictures. I mean, in person, you can come around and you can get behind them. You can look at them profile. You know, you have a lot of different ways to evaluate them. But through these pictures, I don't think you guys are far off.
And even if you do think that it's 2 and the official judge says it's 3, the beauty about giving oral reasons is that you have the opportunity to defend your choice. So you get to actually speak up and explain why you thought 2 was superior to 3, and that's the beauty about judging. So the last question we have here with these ones is, who would be the most feminine?
The third one.
Yeah, in these pictures, it's actually really hard to tell. And these 4 heifers are all super feminine. They're very nice and clean through that front third. But yeah, definitely, she's tidy. And so is the number 1 heifer. I'd say she's pretty clean through that front third.
The other thing to look at when looking about femininity is maybe not necessarily how clean they are in the front, but are they smooth jointed? Are they smooth shouldered? How well do they blend in together? Like from nose to tail, how smooth are they? So, I mean, I guess in my opinion, I would say 4, because she's just so smooth in that shoulder and she's very smooth jointed. You can't really pick out one single piece out of her, and just very smooth from the side. And pictures are very hard to tell, and I mean, I get that's where personal preference comes into play as well. But as long as you can justify why and justify your opinion, then you'll do just fine in your oral reasons.
Right. And that's the thing too with, you know, that's kind of the little bit of a crossover between beef and horses. They're not overly similar, but you really have to work your angles when you're looking at a horse. You like to talk about angles and stuff like that. And that's the same when you're talking about femininity in a beef female. You want to look at that underline, her top line, you know, how her neck comes into her shoulder and all that. Like you really need to work your angles with them.
And now for a sheep comparison. I mean, I don't know why I got stuck with sheep, because I don't judge sheep. Like, I don't have sheep, and I'm not going to say I'm very good with sheep. Who has the most depth out of these 4? I'm seeing a lot of 2 in the chat. I would say so. I think she's very clean lined. She's very level in those lines. As for deepest, personal preference might be leaning towards 4, just looking at how deep she is in that heart girth. But overall depth is definitely 2, because she carries that depth all the way to her flank. And I guess going into the second question, who has the cleanest lines? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of 2 in the chat. I would agree. And who has the poorest structure? I'm seeing, yeah, a couple 3s in the chat. A 4. I think 4, like, I think 3 is probably the poorest one in the class. Just looking at like that one front leg, she kind of buckles over on her knee just the slightest. And then with that back leg, she has a bit more set to her hock compared to the other ones. And it could be the angle of the picture. That's hard to tell as well. But it's way nicer judging in person.
So that wraps up tonight. Thank you guys for participating. I know the first couple questions, it was a little awkward, but thank you for just getting into the swing of things and going along with us. Is there any questions left from tonight? Maybe something we talked about or just touched on and you want to clarify?
Don't be scared to ask questions. That's the only way you're going to learn about it.
For horses, like I have like never judged a horse. I was just wondering if judges really care if you know like terminology like of like the sorrel or the dapple or the palomino, or if you can just call them straight out by their color.
You can absolutely just call them their color. But like we said, the more terms you know, the more professional and confident you're going to be. So if you're not super confident with horses, but you know that one is a palomino and you go to give your reasons and you say, you know, leading off my class today, I've got the palomino mare, it's going to give you a confidence boost as well, because you're going to feel that energy from going, okay, I know that this horse is a palomino. Like, I got this now. So absolutely, you don't have to. And if you are in a situation where you're not sure, don't try and make it up and, you know, just stick to what you know. But the more you know, the more professional you're going to sound.
Just don't say the wrong thing. Don't call it by the wrong name. It won't look good on your results.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it'd be the same thing as if you're in a class of beef heifers and you called the Hereford a Simmental or something like that, right? You don't want to mix that up. So if it comes down to it, just use the colors. Or if you really would feel more confident just using your numbers, there's nothing wrong with that either. You can still go back to those numbers and use them. It's just, you know, it kind of sounds better, makes you sound a little more professional when you can use terminology or a color or something like that.
Like Cody had said, using and calling, I guess, your Hereford a Simmental, you could use the Hereford marked heifer, or the heifer with the Hereford characteristics, because you're not technically calling her a Hereford. You're saying she has those characteristics. So that's where, I guess, that's being a little more advanced. But that's where you can get around if you don't know the specific breed. Just say like or the roan heifer, or like the Simmental appearing heifer, that kind of thing. Because then you're not saying definitely this is a Hereford. You're saying that's what she kind of appears to be. It's just one way of getting around that.
And also, if you ever find yourself in a situation, not maybe as much in a competition style, but if you are judging a 4-H show on your own someday, which I'm sure many of you will be, go up to the person on the halter, have a conversation with them, ask a little bit about the animal, stuff like that. Like, that's something that's encouraged, not something that you should be afraid of, you know. Get up to them and ask them questions, and they might bring up something that helps you make your final decision, right? Like, you never know.
That was a great question. Thank you for asking that. Does anybody else have any questions?
If you don't have any questions, if you want to learn something in particular for the following weeks, just let us know, and we can definitely put that into our PowerPoint and cover those topics. Like, if you want to judge something other than livestock, we can definitely do that too.
Absolutely. Kaylee, you were literally 2 seconds ahead of me. I was about to say, what do you guys want to know? So like Kaylee kind of mentioned, next week and the week after, we're going to give you guys an opportunity to actually judge a class and give your oral reasons to us, and then we'll give you feedback. That way you actually get to practice and put it into effect. So if you haven't given a set of reasons in a while, maybe over the next week before we meet again, practice in front of the mirror or in front of mom and dad, just to kind of get the rust off, and we'll do that the next week.
You could even give your reasons in front of a mirror. Like, I mean, I know that works too. So,
Sarah, there was a question in the chat about sending the slides in a group email. I don't know.
Sure. I don't know how we'll do that, but I will get in touch with Tracy and we can figure out something for you guys.
Right. And just so you guys know too, that this will be on the 4-H YouTube channel by the weekend. So then if you want to look at the recording of it again, it'll be there. So I was just thinking when you guys were talking about, if they haven't been at a judging competition, I mean, these kids should all been, but maybe just to go over like what happens at your judging competition with them. Like you could just go through that quick now if there's 6 classes to judge, and then if you wait to give your reasons till later, and if there is ID classes there, or if it's all judging with reasons and or if there's just some classes that are just placings, just to let them know all the different things that they could be judging.
Yeah, absolutely. So most collegiate level competitions or advanced, you will judge probably 8 to 10 classes. You might have a couple of those that are placings only, but you're likely giving reasons on most of those. So when our judging team goes to Agribition and competes there, we judge 12 classes, 3 the night before that are placings only. And then the next day we head to the Agribition grounds and we judge 9 classes there. 1 of those is placings only, and then we give reasons on our remaining 8. And then for the judging competition that Lakeland's putting on later this spring, that you guys are all encouraged and welcome to come to, we haven't finalized for sure how it's going to look, but we will definitely be doing some placings only class, probably about 1/3 of your classes, and then another 2/3 you'll be giving reasons on. And you'll likely be doing it Agribition style, so you will judge your classes back to back and then go off to a separate quieter area and give your placings, give your reasons there. So like we talked about last week, talking about taking really sufficient notes and making sure that you have enough notes to paint a picture is definitely a huge part of our competitions. And if you come and compete here in a couple weeks, it's going to be something that you're going to want to make sure you're doing, because you are going to be judging several classes at once in a back-to-back style, and then having to give reasons later on.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah.
What are the type of classes that we'll be judging? Do you guys know that yet, or?
Again, we haven't finalized everything, but you'll definitely be doing some beef classes, horse. We're probably going to try and have sheep. We're hoping for a dairy class. And then we'll do some non-livestock classes as well. So probably something like hay or grain, or maybe silage. And then we'll probably have some placings only classes that are just kind of totally out there and you will probably never judge again. So it's not really something you can prepare for, and we haven't figured out those yet, but some that have been done in the past that we know of were saddles, blueberry jam, quilts, I think. So things like that.
Yeah. I know one year we had Jello, boots, and at one point we did have rabbits or ducks.
Yeah, I think we're going to try and get swine, so you might have an opportunity to judge some pigs as well.
Be ready for anything.
Pretty much. Next week and the week after, like I said, we'll be doing some classes with you guys. So we'll try and do some livestock. Probably the 4 that we went over tonight will be up there. And then some non-livestock. Is there any non-livestock or even livestock ones that we're missing? Like it's one of your projects and we haven't covered it? Because we do want to make sure that there's something for everybody. And if you're thinking, I have never judged anything that they talked about tonight and I'm super lost, we would like to know that. Okay,
They are a quiet bunch, aren't they?
I know.
We actually get to try the blueberry jam to judge it
Over Zoom? If you know how to do that, let me know.
Oh, over Zoom. I thought you meant as an actual class in a competition.
If it was actually at a competition, maybe. I'm not sure. But I think that might be a challenge over Zoom. Well, if you guys don't have... Oh, yeah.
I think they got lots to study for next week, all the fabulous terms and all that stuff. So I think you guys give them some really great information, and they got lots to look at and think about before next week.
Perfect. Hopefully you guys have some new reasons that you can practice next week. Well, thank you all for having us again this week. We had a lot of fun, and we will see you next Wednesday.